Romans 1:18 through 32. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil, no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Kyung-mi Lee is a staff reporter for the Yale News publication, and on Valentine's Day 2020, she released an article entitled "Settling Down: Romance in the Era of Gen Z." Lee offers an honest, vulnerable, personal assessment of her experience regarding the modern-day hookup culture. She writes, quote, "The easiest way to avoid falling in love is to leave before the regret settles in. To create an illusion of control under the guise of non-committal one-night stands, and to just focus on sex." Lee's attitude is but a microcosm of our broader culture. According to Pew, marriage in American society has been steadily declining since 1960. And if people get married, they're getting married later in life than ever before. The average age of a first marriage is the highest in recorded history right now, 29 for men and 27 for women. Now, there are an array of reasons for this, some legitimate, like economic and socioeconomic challenges, but for many others, the indoctrination of autonomy and individualism has created a culture where control is ultimate, where pleasure is worshipped. Patrick Yang, a sophomore at Yale who was interviewed for this article, reflected, quote, "I've heard a joke on campus that goes something like this. First base is hooking up. Second base is talking. Third base is going on a date, and fourth base is dating. Granted, this may be a product of the college hookup culture, certainly that of Yale's, but I still believe this reflects on our generation's attitude on relationships." Fascinating, isn't it? The modern pathway to love and intimacy is actually a great reversal of what has historically and biblically been modeled for us. And so the question then is this: is it working? Is it working? Every conceivable measurable metric would say no. We are lonelier, more stressed out, anxious, and depressed than ever before. Choice abundance is overstimulating our brains. Lee offers a more sobering assessment. She writes, quote, "I turn to sex as a transient experience to manufacture a connection until it no longer feels like shared intimacy." She concludes, "Being held is nice, but I want someone to understand me. I want to stare into my partner's eyes without it being a performance of soft dating." Or as the pop star Miley Cyrus more bluntly summarized it, quote, "Having sex is easy. You can find someone to have sex with in like 5 seconds. We want to find someone we can talk to and be ourselves with. And that's fairly slim pickings." Ironically, the societal normalized embrace of casual sex has actually led to a reduction in sexual activity. The general rate of both dating and sex amongst teens and young adults is declining. Gen Zers are having less sex with fewer partners than their parents' and grandparents' generation did before them. And before we give ourselves too much credit, this isn't because of piousness or awareness or even an evolving conscience. This is due to a deep-seated fear of commitment, vulnerability, and rejection. The sociologist Julie Arbitz found that just 1 in 10 members of Gen Z say they are committed to being committed. Here's my point. Our very concept of sex has been completely obliterated. And many of us are languishing, struggling with how to navigate a sex-saturated culture in a sex-less generation. We're wondering how to have flourishing relationships in a society that has conditioned us to believe that having fun means engaging in physical connection without emotional attachment. My friends, could there be a better way? A way that allows us to integrate our bodies sexually rather than dislocating them from who we are as whole persons. A way that values the body and gives honor to the necessary moral implications and emotional depth required for loving intimacy to be experienced. There is. It's the way of Jesus. And when lived into this way, we discover a sexuality that is far healthier and far more fulfilling than the heartache of the hookup culture that we have become entrenched in. So, good morning and welcome to church. I bet you didn't wake up excited to talk about sex today. And if you did, well, we can have a different conversation afterwards. If you're new with us, welcome. We are right in the thick of a series of teachings entitled Temptations of the Soul, where we have been soberly self-examining in our lives, seeking to pull out what the ancients traditionally identified as the 3 enemies of the soul, which are the world, the flesh, and the devil, and their modern contemporary expressions of money, sex, and power. And so up on the docket for today is sex. And today, I want to help us re-envision and reimagine what the story of sexuality is intended to be, to help us re-story our lives in light of the gospel, which provides the most liberating and most fulfilling way forward as human beings imaginable. But in order to do that, I'm going to need to deconstruct the story into 3 parts today: creation, decreation, and recreation. You ready? All right. Well, ready or not, here we go. So part 1, creation. The story of creation begins in a garden on a mountain where life and life to the full is teeming with potential. So much beauty, so much creativity, but something still missing. No ally suitable for the man created by God to fulfill God's mandate, which was to fill the earth and subdue it. That would require another. So Adam, human, wakes from a deep sleep, and as his eyes adjust to the light, there he sees another. Like him, but unlike him. Separate, yet one. And so Adam sang, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." And in the garden, the first wedding took place. A covenant was consummated, goodness personified. As the biblical writer notes, Adam and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. And as the creation narrative comes to a close, we are given this seemingly obscure sentence. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. One flesh. There it is. On just the first few pages of the scriptures, we are given a vision for what sexual union is. That it's more than just a hookup. It's more than just pleasure. It's more than body-on-body contact. The idea of one flesh is signifying that this physical unity is the encapsulation of unity of all other humanly possible levels, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The theologian Richard Foster writes, quote, "Our human sexuality, our maleness and femaleness, is not just an accidental arrangement of the human species, not just a convenient way to keep the human race going. No, it is at the center of our true humanity. We exist as male and female in relationship. Our sexuality, our capacity to love and be loved is intimately related to our creation in the image of God." What a high view of human sexuality. Some of us may have grown up being told that sex is bad or dirty or not to be discussed. But here we are given a stunningly beautiful picture of what this physical union was to entail. God used the rib from Adam to form and fashion Eve in an effort to signify the interdependence of their relationship. The two of them were interwoven and interlaced. There was no rivalry, no hierarchy, and no independent autonomy. Rather, it was two sexually different persons instructed to co-rule and co-reign God's creation alongside of him. But the plot thickens. In Genesis chapter 4, we read this. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. Now, I love the NIV translation, but this is a poor translation. Adam made love in the original Hebrew is actually more literally, and Adam knew his wife Eve. The ESV does it better here. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." In Hebrew, to know is the word yada. We talked about this a few weeks ago in our series Life Together, but here's a quick recap. The best translation for the Hebrew yada in English is to know by experience. In Psalm 139, David writes intimately, "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You yada me." This term carries deep personal connotations of knowing. And the fact that its etymology is introduced in Genesis 4 as a sexual euphemism means that sex is more than just a physical act. Rather, it is intended to read as the most profound connection two persons can experience. And so here's what I want us to catch. If we are ever tempted to believe that sex is corrupt, or dirty, or gross, or shameful, or you fill in the blank, I want you to understand that that is a warped view of sex. God is the originator and creator of sex. Notice that sex is introduced before the fall that is to come. Genesis 2 again, the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." Again, in the garden, there is a wedding, and that covenant is consummated. Verse 25, Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Unashamed eroticism existed before the fall. Foster writes, quote, "The fall did not create eros, or sensual or passionate love. It only perverted it. As another writer put it, we were sexual before we were sinful." Back in Genesis 1, we're told, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it.'" I love this from Dr. Nancy Piercy. She writes, quote, "Making a culture starts with making babies." And our church said, amen. No, we love our sanctuary babies. But listen, friends, from the beginning of time, sex was mandated from God, from a creator to his creation. And being made in the image of God means that sex is not less than a biological aspect of our anthropology, but that it is so much more. It is not just about pleasure or reproduction. It is about the communion of two persons, male and female, covenanting together, mirroring the communion of the divine persons that is the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. Our sexuality is meant to mirror, reflect, and reveal the very character of God. Sex, at its essence, is good. It is a gift to enjoy. Or it is a gift to exploit. And it is to that exploitation which we now turn. So part 2, decreation. Genesis 3 begins this way. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. Most of us know what happened next. Eve took the fruit. Adam was there. He could have said something. He didn't. He ate it too. Complicit they both are in this very real choice. And in a flash, paradise melts away. One look was all it took. Sin, evil, and death had entered the world. This rebellion was done out of an inherent desire for control. And out of that choice comes a curse, a consequence, and another curse. First, to the snake, a curse, and then a prophecy. So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman, not a curse, but a consequence. To the woman, he said, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." And to the man, not a curse on him, but a curse on the ground. The very ground that the man would have to labor and toil and futility. The very ground by which the man came into existence in the first place. So the original mandate remains the same. Fill the earth and subdue it. But human nature does not remain the same. Death has now entered the picture. Decreation has set in. And so with sin came separation. And God declared that Adam and Eve must leave the place where heaven and earth collide. But all was not lost, though it seemed that way. The snake crusher would come, but it would not be that day, or any day in the near future. Instead, death and decreation continue to expand. It's not long after this introduction to sexuality at its fullest that we see it become distorted. After the fall, Adam and Eve bear two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain ends up killing Abel out of jealousy and insecurity, and as a consequence for his sin, he is placed under a curse that drives him away from the land he was set to inherit. But God, in his kindness, marks Cain as a show of protection against anyone who seeks to harm him while he wanders eastward, the direction away from Eden. Cain settles in the land of Nod. He gets married and he bears a son, Enoch. In the land of Nod, we are introduced to the first city ever built called Enoch, named after Cain's son. And in this city, humanity progresses downward into further and further sin. Eventually, 4 generations later, we're introduced to Lamech, the great-great-great-grandson of Cain. And here's Lamech's biography, Genesis chapter 4, beginning in verse 19. Lamech married 2 women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Aha, so it is here that we are introduced to polygamy for the first time. This is the first time on the pages of the scriptures that we see a sexual arrangement that falls outside of God's original design that we read about in Genesis chapter 2, in which Jesus quotes verbatim in Matthew 19 of one man and one woman becoming one flesh. Adah literally means pleasure, ornament, or beauty. And Zillah means shade, which was most likely a reference to Zillah's magnificent head of hair. Zillah bears a daughter whom Lamech names Naamah, which means pleasant or lovely to look at. Do you see it? Now there is this inherent over-sexualization that is taking place. No longer is it enough to be named and known as an inherent imago Dei. Instead, we are given worth and dignity based primarily on physical attractiveness or the pleasure that we can offer. One of the great tragedies of our day is that people drop in and out of marriage totally on the basis of romantic love and sexual attraction. It is, at its core, dehumanizing. We degrade people's worth to the lowest common denominator of sexual attraction and desire. If either of those things disappear or are absent for a season or an extended period of time, the first thought is not that we live in a broken world, but that I have married a broken person who's no longer able to give me what I deserve. Now, you may be here and you're not married, and the temptation is to idealize marriage and say, well, that wouldn't be me if I had a partner. And respectfully, statistically speaking, 7 out of 10 men and 4 out of 10 women are viewing pornography now on a regular basis, dehumanizing humans via a screen for pleasure. And I don't say that to shame anyone. I say that to say we, all of us, no matter our relationship status, we are being swept up in this dehumanizing worldview of sex and love. It is the very water that we swim in. On and on and on we could go through the pages of the Scriptures, story upon stories that do not condone, but also do not hide the very real consequences of sexual brokenness. Further strife, hurt, and division take place as a result of humanity's desperate grasping for control in the realm of sexuality. Be it with Hagar and Sarah, Lot's daughters, Leah and Rachel, Dinah, Bilhah, or Tamar. In just the first book of the Bible, in Genesis, we are introduced to story after story of polygamy, infidelity, sexual predators, sexual oppression, sexual distortion, rape, incest, and prostitution. And notice the names of the figures involved. Who is most often the victim of sexual sin? Women. Be it polygamy, infidelity, or any other form of sexual brokenness, these distortions are justified by oppressors who cease to see usually women as the imago Dei they were created in, and instead as commodities to be bought, sold, or used. And again, if you think that was then and it's different now, think again. A recent study by the British Journal of Criminology found that 1 in 8 videos on pornography websites today depict sexual violence or non-consensual conduct against women. 1 in 8. And this can all be traced back to the fall. We must remember that the rule of a man over a woman is not a descriptor of Edenic sexuality before the fall, but a consequence of the fall. Misogyny, sexism, domination, and exploitation are all distortions of sexuality, not fullness. This is the slow descent the fall of humanity instituted, decreation of what God originally deemed to be very, very good. Over the last few weeks, we have introduced these ancient ideas like the world, the flesh, and the devil. And we've talked extensively about how the devil's strategy is lies. He is the father of lies. And the lie of sex is lust. Lust is nourished by the desire of the flesh. It's a longing for what we were created for, union with God. But it stops short of what it was intended and it settles for less. Foster again writes, quote, "True sexuality leads to humanness, but lust leads to depersonalization. Lust captivates rather than emancipates, devours rather than nourishes." Paul wrote about this 2,000 years ago in a way that sounds supremely relevant for our modern moment. This is a longer passage, but listen intently. He writes to the church in Rome, beginning in chapter 1, verse 18. "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people, who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done." Paul is skillfully, clearly making the case that the root problem of sexual sin lies not in our lack of discipline or awareness, but in the fact that we don't love the light and the beauty and the glory of God above all other things. The root of sexual sin is the root of all sin, exchanging the truth about God for a lie. It is the echo of the fall in Eden. We settle for counterfeits. We embrace lies rather than the truth. We hide in the shadows rather than coming into the light. And the fallout is immense. All of these expressions of sexual sin and brokenness, and look where it leads. Verse 29. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do those very things, but also approve of those who practice them. These exchanges are wrapped and tidied up around billions of dollars of marketing today that are seeking to convince you to settle and to sell your soul to something less than what God has for you and me. There's the liberal story, emphasizing your individual rights, your freedom, your identity, and your ability to consent to do whatever you want with whoever you want. There's the secular story, emphasizing pleasure, de-emphasizing the body's worth, building relationships around social contracts, swiping right and one-night stands, idolizing personal fulfillment as the barometer for individual success. There's the conservative story, emphasizing purity and moralism, but overwhelmingly shadowed by hypocrisy, because these values have been loudly preached in public but quietly ignored in private, leading to wave upon wave of tragic scandals which we, the church, have been horrifyingly complicit in. Each of these stories, if you follow them to the end, will leave you unfulfilled. They are echoes of what tragically developed east of Eden. And the destruction of all that is good and true and beautiful will not lead to a better or brighter future, but an empty one. My friends, we need a better story. A story that seeks to reform and recreate what has been lost. And thankfully, that story exists. So part 3, recreation. After the world was broken by sin, God did not abandon it. Despite Adam and Eve's dismissal from the garden, God promised a Redeemer who would one day set everything right again. And in this redemption, Paul writes, creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. This freedom and glory that we will experience is not just for our souls, but for our whole selves, spirit, mind, and body. Sex is not anything to be embarrassed by or ashamed of. It is to be embraced in the loving, safe confines of a covenant union. The Song of Solomon is a book within the library of the Scriptures that many have scratched their heads at in attempting to interpret, mostly because of the, quite frankly, uncomfortability of much of the language it uses. Much medieval theology interpreted the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs as it's sometimes called, allegorically, as a metaphor for God's intense love for us. And on some level, this is true. But a more straightforward reading sees the song as a celebration of sensuous love. Listen to a few of these excerpts. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Your lips drop sweetness as the honeycomb, my bride. Milk and honey are under your tongue. You can breathe now. It's okay. Here's the Old Testament scholar Trimper Longman in his commentary on these passages. Quote, the Hebrew is quite erotic, and most translators cannot bring themselves to bring out the obvious meaning. There is no shy, shamed, mechanical movement under the sheets. Rather, the two stand before each other, aroused, feeling no shame, but only joy in each other's sexuality. My friends, this is eros as it should be. Passion without promiscuity. Delight without domination. Love without lust. We must remember that we are whole beings. Our longing is to fully know and fully love, and to be fully known and fully loved by God and one another. Sex is an icon for this intimate union. It's far more than physical, emotional, psychological, or spiritual. It is all of these things. Paul calls it a mystery because there is something so holy, so true, and so related to our forever union with Christ that he is unable to put it into words. The biblical writer's argument against sexual immorality is not a denigration or dismissal of sexual pleasure. It is an elevation of a theology of the body. Paul writes, "Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh, but whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit." See, there is a sacred story that emphasizes sexuality as a picture and a signpost of what is to come, that is built on a foundational theology of covenant union, that receives sexuality as a gift to enjoy rather than a right that is owed. And according to this story, that redemption and restoration has already begun, my friends. To the Corinthians, Paul lists off a slew of sexual sins, but then he finishes by saying this, "And that is what some of you were. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God." In other words, in Jesus, freedom has been found. Sexual wholeness can be pursued. Dear friends, this means that no matter what you've done, no matter whose bed you've slept in, no matter what shame-filled secrets fill your mind, new life is available to you today. Healing is here. Sanctuary exists as a haven for broken people. That includes sexually broken people. That includes people like you and like me. We are after the reclamation of what we were to originally inherit, union with God. This is the aim. My friends, the story of creation is going somewhere. The preferred future God is working towards is a restoration of the garden as a garden city. All that has been broken within us sexually will be restored and made right. The two will become one, meaning the church and Jesus Christ will be wedded together in eternity. In Hosea, God says, "I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord." To the Ephesians, Paul writes, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." In Revelation, John writes, "I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband." A bride prepared for a groom to be consummated in a garden city. And in the age to come, all, male and female, will have a seat at this table. All will feast at the wedding supper of the Lamb, side by side as co-conquerors and co-rulers in God's kingdom. Recreation awaits. A beautiful vision, yeah? But what about in the meantime? What do we do? Well, in the meantime, we lament and mourn the ways that our sexuality has been broken. And we learn what it means to celebrate and embrace our sexuality in the here and the now. Father Ronald Rollheiser, in his classic, The Holy Longing, writes this, quote, "A mature sexuality is when a person looks at what he or she has helped create, swells in a delight that breaks the prison of his or her selfishness, and feels as God feels when God looks at creation. For this reason, sexuality lies at the center of the spiritual life. A healthy sexuality is the single most powerful vehicle there is to lead us to selflessness and joy. Just as unhealthy sexuality helps constellate selfishness and unhappiness, as does nothing else. We will be happy in this life depending upon whether or not we have a healthy sexuality." What a claim, right? And so the question then is how? How do we do that? How do we develop a healthy sexuality? Well, it is through the practice of fidelity. All of us who consider ourselves to be apprentices to Jesus, who are actively practicing his way, participating in community, and seeking to permeate the world, all of us, whether male or female, whether single, married, divorced, widowed, or remarried, straight or same-sex attracted, all of us are called to fidelity in our sexual relationships. So, what is fidelity? Well, let's first discuss what it isn't, and then what it is. So first, what it isn't. Fidelity is not a rejection of our sexuality, but a proper perspective towards it. We celebrate that we are sexual beings with an innate desire for compassion, communion, companionship, and love. To practice fidelity does not mean that we only think of ourselves and others in non-sexual terms. To make someone else sexless is just another way to dehumanize them. It's to divorce their sexuality from their humanity. So, what fidelity is then is remaining faithful to Jesus and to our God-given nature as sexual beings. Fidelity means mutuality, not lording our power over one another, but treating one another with dignity and respect. Fidelity means honesty and transparency. Fidelity is faithfulness, commitment, or loyalty to our calling. And our highest calling is that of son or daughter, made in the image of God. My friends, understand that this cannot be done alone. We need each other. Somehow we have created a society that celebrates and normalizes unlimited sexual activity and conquest, and yet still treats it with such secrecy and hiddenness. Think about any popular mainstream television show or movie right now. The affairs still happen in secret. The one-night stands still happen at night. Domineering sex is still shown in a negative light. Why? Because deep down we know that this is not how it's supposed to be. But for many of us, we're struggling on an island, afraid and unwilling to bring this into the light. My friends, it is only in the light where true healing takes place. And so here's my invitation to you. If you feel stuck today in the rut of unhealthy sexuality, be honest about it. Open up to a loving individual or community here who can and will receive you with grace and kindness and accountability and challenge. We need both, consequences and grace, truth and love. The church historically has done such a poor job creating space for sexual brokenness. It's like the proverbial elephant in the room. Everyone knows it exists and no one is willing to talk about it. But we are after the reclamation of what we were to originally inherit, union with God. And that journey begins with creating space to expose the false self and to allow our true selves to be fully seen, fully known, and fully loved. God will not heal what we will not name. I want to close today by speaking specifically to two groups of people that the church has historically done a really poor job of naming, seeing, and loving in this area. And so first, to those who are single in our church community, I'd like to begin with an apology. We in the institutional church have often done a poor job of acknowledging and dignifying singleness. We have, in many ways, made marriage an idol rather than an icon. We are living in a cultural moment where singles are soon to be the majority of our society. And so just know, if you're here and you're single, we're so glad that you're here. And we want to create space for you to grapple with your sexuality in an honest and an integrity-filled way. To be single is not to be devoid of sexual needs. We know that. But we have to catch this, my friends. Having sex is not the whole reality of sexuality. Sex is a gift that affords us an opportunity to experience genuine intimacy on this side of eternity, yes, but a healthy sexuality doesn't inherently involve having sex. To reduce sexuality to the sole practice would alienate a whole swath of people, including many vocational celibates like Paul, Jesus, and many of the great saints of church history, who intentionally chose to live life without having sex with another person. Rolheiser writes, quote, "We are healthily sexual when we have love, community, communion, family, friendship, affection, creativity, joy, delight, humor, and self-transcendence in our lives. Having these, as we know, depends on many things and not just whether or not we sleep alone. One can have a lot of sex and still lack real love, just as one may be celibate and have love in abundance. And so the invitation for those of you who are single here today is to continue developing a healthy sexuality while waiting to have sex if marriage is a desire of yours. And if it's not, then vocational celibacy or intentionally choosing singleness in order to channel your eros wholly unto Jesus and the world around you is not just beautiful, but biblical. It is not an inferior or a superior way of life. It is simply a different calling, and it will be celebrated here. If you are single, you have a seat at our table. And then to those who are same-sex attracted in our community, I know that the topic of gender and sexuality has caused such immense pain, hurt, disorientation, and confusion for so many of you. And so once again, I'd like to begin by just offering a word of apology and hopefully a word of compassion and healing. I know in many religious spaces, you can show up not feeling loved, accepted, or seen, but judged, misunderstood, and rejected. And I just want to name that and say that I'm so, so sorry. I'm sorry for the ways that the church and we as leaders in the church have been complicit in that. And I want you to know that if you're here and you're same-sex attracted, we are so, so glad that you're here. And we want to create space for you to grapple with your sexuality in an honest and integrity-filled way. You have a seat at our table. We love you and long to offer you the same invitation as everyone else, which is fidelity. It is to celibacy, like our single brothers and sisters, if marriage is not a desire of yours. Or it is to a lifelong covenantal union to one sexually different person if marriage is a desire of yours. Our hope is that regardless of your sexual orientation, that you feel so welcome here. But to also know that you're a part of a church community that is uncompromising in its commitment to practice the way of Jesus, and that we are unapologetic in lovingly calling all people who call our church home to live out the biblical vision of sexuality that we see from beginning to end in the pages of the Scriptures. I hope that my heart is coming across clearly today, church family. Sexual holiness is something we all fall short in, and something we all are called into. To the married people in the room, the invitation is fidelity. To be faithful to one spouse for life, so much as is in your control. To live in union together with no secrets. It means keeping the marriage bed pure, honoring your marriage by remaining committed and faithful to one another. To the dating in the room, the invitation is fidelity. To realigning the erotic desires of your heart and channeling them towards God, the lover of our souls, first as we await a holy matrimony. To those steeped in lustful thoughts or hiding a sex addiction or a pornography addiction, the invitation is fidelity. To bringing this into the light, to being known and getting help, to realigning the erotic desires of your heart and body towards Jesus. For all of us, it looks like creating space in our lives to be fully known and fully loved in this area. Now, in my experience, this is done best in same-sex community, giving us the space to find common ground and common language with others who understand our experience within our engendered bodies. But I also believe that this should happen cross-generationally and cross-relationally. It's healthy and helpful as a single 30-something to have perspective from a 60-year-old widow, or a married 40-something with kids to learn from a late 20s married person. So my suggestion, and in our circles, this is how it goes in our triads, but my suggestion is to link up with other men and women across the spectrum of stage of life and age, and to create some space to be seen and safe. To not avoid accountability, but to embrace coming clean and being washed new. If you're not in a circle, we would highly encourage you to register for one. These are neighborhood-based dinner groups that meet together weekly to eat, pray, play, and practice together. And they're launching again at the end of the summer. But if that's not the right option for this season of life for you, please don't use that as a reason to not practice fidelity. Make some calls, send some texts, get some people around your table, and create some space for the conversation you know you need to have. If you need help with how to have those conversations, we have some resources that we'd be more than happy to recommend to you. The story of our lives will be determined by what we believe and how we act on those beliefs. And I hope today you've seen how allowing ourselves to be restoried in the light of the gospel provides the most liberating and most fulfilling way forward as human beings imaginable. A story not of dislocation and degradation, but of wholeness and fulfillment. Union with God awaits for those who are in Christ Jesus. What wonderful news this is.